2026 World Cup has come to an end, with Spain deservedly lifting the trophy after a thrilling final. But before the celebrations had even settled, the football world was already consumed by one number: 64. It's not a rumour, it's not a mistake, it's the very real possibility that the 2030 FIFA World Cup could feature 64 national teams instead of the planned 48. That immediately raises a huge question. Would adding 16 more teams give smaller footballing nations a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to chase their World Cup dream? Or is this simply another move that allows FIFA and a handful of football organisations to make even more money? Today, we're going to break down what's really happening, who's supporting the proposal, who's against it, and, most importantly, who actually stands to benefit the most if a 64-team World Cup becomes reality. If you've only seen the recent headlines, you'd probably assume that the idea of expanding the World Cup to 64 teams has only just appeared, but that's actually not true. The proposal was first raised back in March 2025, when Ignacio Alonso, a FIFA Council member representing Uruguay, introduced the idea during an online FIFA Council meeting. The reaction was immediate. UEFA President Alexander Ceferin publicly opposed the proposal during a press conference in Belgrade, calling it a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, this proposal was maybe even more surprising for me than for you. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's not a good idea for the World Cup itself, and it's not a good idea for our qualifiers as well, as you know.
So why are we talking about it now? Well, there's a good reason. The debate has been reignited immediately after the conclusion of the 2026 World Cup. On July 21st, CONMEBOL President Alejandro Dominguez posted on X, confirming that South America is actively pushing for the 2030 World Cup to feature 64 teams as part of the tournament's 100th anniversary celebration. But perhaps even more interesting was what happened during the World Cup final. UEFA President Alexander Ceferin did not attend the final match. Several media outlets, including the BBC, interpreted his absence as a subtle but deliberate sign of dissatisfaction with FIFA. As things stand today, however, this is still only a proposal. Nothing has been officially approved. The final decision rests with the 37-member FIFA Council, and according to FIFA President Gianni Infantino, no decision will be made until FIFA has gathered enough data to properly evaluate how the new 48-team format performed during the 2026 tournament. Even without the 64-team proposal, the 2030 World Cup is already unlike any tournament we've ever seen. Most of the competition will be hosted by Spain, Portugal and Morocco. However, the opening matches will take place in Uruguay, Argentina and Paraguay to commemorate the birthplace of the very first World Cup in 1930, a tournament that featured just 13 teams. For CONMEBOL, hosting just 3 symbolic opening matches simply isn't enough. South America has only 10 member associations, yet it is home to some of the greatest names in World Cup history: Brazil, Argentina and Uruguay, the nation where the tournament was born. To them, the World Cup's 100th anniversary should leave a lasting mark across the entire continent, not just be reduced to a few ceremonial matches before the tournament shifts entirely to Europe. That's exactly why the idea of a 64-team World Cup is so attractive to CONMEBOL. More teams mean more matches. More matches mean Uruguay, Argentina and Paraguay could potentially host far more than just opening ceremonies, perhaps even entire group stages instead of a single symbolic fixture. But there's another number that rarely gets mentioned. Even under the current 48-team format used at the 2026 World Cup, South America already enjoys a remarkable advantage. Despite having only 10 member nations, CONMEBOL was allocated 6 automatic qualification spots, with a 7th available through the Intercontinental Playoffs. In other words, 6 out of South America's 10 national teams are already almost guaranteed to reach the World Cup finals. That's a qualification rate unmatched by any other confederation in world football. And that's an important detail to remember. Because later in this video, we'll come back to the question of who really benefits the most from expanding the tournament to 64 teams. If CONMEBOL has become the proposal's strongest supporter, the opposition is just as clear. This isn't simply a debate among journalists or football analysts. The presidents of 3 of football's biggest continental confederations have all publicly voiced their opposition. UEFA President Alexander Ceferin has been by far the most outspoken. He didn't just describe the proposal as a bad idea, he also criticised FIFA for failing to inform UEFA before the proposal was presented to the FIFA Council. For UEFA, the wealthiest and arguably the most influential confederation in world football, the issue has become more than just tournament expansion. It's increasingly seen as another test of the already strained relationship between Gianni Infantino and Alexander Ceferin. The opposition doesn't stop there. AFC president Sheikh Salman has also publicly rejected the proposal, warning that expanding the World Cup in this way could turn the tournament into chaos. Meanwhile, CONCACAF president Victor Montagliani argued that the idea risks disrupting the entire global football ecosystem. 3 different confederations, 3 different presidents, 1 shared position. They all oppose the proposal. Meanwhile, CONMEBOL remains the only continental confederation to openly and strongly support it. A lot of people have framed this debate as a simple question. Is expanding the World Cup to 64 teams a step forward for global football? Or is it nothing more than a commercial decision driven by money? The truth is, treating those 2 ideas as opposites misses the bigger picture. For Gianni Infantino, they've never been mutually exclusive.
My objective is, however, also to increase significantly the revenues of FIFA. I think my track record in UEFA speaks for itself in this respect.
Since becoming FIFA president in 2016, Infantino has consistently pushed the idea that the World Cup shouldn't be reserved for football's traditional superpowers. Instead, he believes it should be a truly global tournament, one where every nation has the right to dream. Looking back through history, almost every expansion of the World Cup has been met with the same criticism. The very first World Cup in 1930 featured just 13 teams. For decades, the tournament remained at around 16 teams. It expanded to 24 teams in 1982, then 32 teams in 1998, and finally 48 teams beginning with the 2026 World Cup. Every single expansion was met with warnings that the tournament's quality would decline. Yet over time, each new format gradually became accepted as the new normal. That said, using those previous expansions as proof that 64 teams will also work is a flawed comparison. Moving from 48 to 64 teams may only represent a 33% increase in the number of participants. But when you consider that FIFA has 211 member associations, a 64-team World Cup would mean that nearly 1/3 of all FIFA members would qualify for the finals. That would be an unprecedented proportion in the tournament's history. And that's exactly why even many people who supported expanding the World Cup to 48 teams have become much more cautious about taking the next step to 64. From Infantino's perspective, however, there are several powerful reasons to keep expanding FIFA's competitions. Under FIFA's electoral system, every member association gets exactly 1 vote, regardless of whether it's a global football powerhouse or a tiny island nation. That means earning the support of smaller football associations is one of the most effective ways for any FIFA president to strengthen and maintain his political position. The 48-team World Cup, the expanded Club World Cup, and programs like FIFA Forward all have something in common. They provide smaller football nations with more opportunities, more funding, and greater access to FIFA competitions. And when those associations directly benefit from FIFA's policies, they're naturally more inclined to support the leadership responsible for those changes. In other words, expanding FIFA tournaments isn't just about creating more matches or generating more revenue. It's also a political strategy that helps Infantino consolidate his influence within world football. If the proposal is ultimately approved, the most practical tournament format would likely feature 16 groups of 4 teams, with the top 2 teams from each group advancing to a round of 32. Ironically, that structure would actually be simpler than the current 48-team format used in 2026. The tournament would consist of roughly 128 matches, last around 6 weeks, and require at least 20 stadiums to host the competition. According to multiple reports, the 64-team proposal is also being considered as a one-time exception, introduced solely to celebrate the World Cup's 100th anniversary in 2030. The 2034 World Cup in Saudi Arabia is still expected to retain the 48-team format. If we only look at this debate from a sporting perspective, we'll miss the biggest driving force behind the entire proposal: money. Following the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, FIFA reported nearly $5.8 billion in revenue. In fact, across the entire 4-year financial cycle from 2019 to 2022, FIFA generated around $7.5 billion, a figure the organisation itself described as a record-breaking financial achievement. Ahead of the 2026 World Cup, Gianni Infantino predicted that the tournament would generate roughly double that amount, estimating revenues of around $10 to $11 billion. But the final numbers turned out to be even more impressive. According to figures FIFA shared with its member associations, the 2026 World Cup alone is expected to generate approximately $9 billion in revenue, driven largely by ticket sales, premium hospitality packages, and an unprecedented boom in the secondary ticket market. When combined with the expanded Club World Cup and FIFA's other competitions, the organisation's total revenue for the 2023 to 2026 financial cycle is projected to exceed $15 billion. In other words, every time the World Cup expands, FIFA's revenue doesn't simply increase, it accelerates. More teams create more matches. More matches mean more broadcast hours. More broadcast hours attract larger television deals. And when more countries qualify, more national markets become emotionally invested in the tournament, making sponsors willing to pay even higher prices for global exposure. That's precisely why, despite facing opposition from 3 of football's most powerful confederations, it's difficult to imagine FIFA walking away from the 64-team proposal entirely. The financial incentives are simply too significant to ignore. According to estimates currently being cited by multiple media outlets, if the World Cup expands to 64 teams, the qualification slots could be distributed roughly as follows: UEFA, 21 places; CAF, 12 places; AFC, 10 places; CONCACAF, 8 places; CONMEBOL, 8 places; OFC, 1 place, plus 4 intercontinental playoff spots. At first glance, it looks as though UEFA remains the biggest winner. After all, 21 qualification spots is still the highest number allocated to any confederation. But that's only if you look at the raw numbers. Once you compare those figures against the total number of member associations in each confederation, the picture changes dramatically. CONMEBOL has just 10 member nations, yet it could receive 8 direct qualification spots. That means nearly 80% of South America's national teams would qualify for the World Cup. No other confederation comes anywhere close to that level of representation. By comparison, the AFC has around 47 member associations. Even if Asia's allocation increases from 8.5 qualification spots to around 10, fewer than 1/4 of its members would qualify. UEFA would receive 21 places for its 55 member associations, representing less than 40% of the confederation. In other words, when measured proportionally rather than absolutely, no confederation stands to benefit more than CONMEBOL. And that also explains why CONMEBOL has been the proposal's only vocal supporter from the very beginning. For South America, expanding the tournament dramatically increases the percentage of its member nations that can reach the World Cup. For every other major confederation, however, expansion simply means dividing a relatively modest increase in qualification spots among a much larger number of member associations. That's why they've been far more cautious, or, in some cases, openly opposed to the idea. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It really helps the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.